Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is mainly video directed to Catholics, to even Eastern Orthodox, to Oriental Orthodox, because Protestants don't care about that stuff, and atheists or secularists couldn't, you know, makes zero difference to them what the internal affairs of the Catholic Church have to do with them. Anyways, this is the topic of great import. It will be a longer video because I don't like doing a billion videos on the same subject like I did on Pope Benedict XVI. But it is about the validity of the pontificate of Pope Francis. And this is brought about by our good Bishop Athanasius Schneider, who recently penned a letter in which he defends the validity of the pontificate of Pope Francis in response to Father Altman, who publicly recently declared that Pope Francis is not Pope because of a multitude of heresies, so he fell from the pontificate automatically with no declaration. So Bishop Athanasius Schneider comes in to the defense of Pope Francis and actually a condemnation of those Catholics who say the Pope is can fall from the pontificate because of heresy, as we will see. Actually, not just the Pope, but anyone in ecclesiastical office loses that office because of heresy. So up front, and I have to say that no matter all the good that Bishop Schneider has done for faithful Catholics over the years, his inability to admit the fact actually stated in both codes of canon law uh, is troubling. It is kind of deceptive. One might even direct to him the saying of he might seek to deceive even the elect if it is possible. Bishop Athanasius Schneider, we're going to go through his letter. It basically starts off with, it's off the Remnant newspaper. So Bishop Schneider, again, no condemnation because he's one of the very, very, very few bishops who stands for the truth of the Catholic faith and for the ancient traditional Roman rite and the other Eastern rites. So it is, you know, his work of good is you know undeniable. So well, let's start with let's start with his beginning of this letter. So there's, I hope you guys, well, I mean, it doesn't really matter to me. Yeah, I'm investing a lot of time in researching all of this topic, and actually, I now understand things I did not understand before, and I thought there was a contradiction between the old code of canon law, which I'm going to show you now, and the new code of canon law. But actually, there isn't. After researching this article for this video, I now fully understand as much as possible the situation and what is possible and what is in fact the case. So let's start off with what Bishop Schneider says here. There is no authority to declare or consider an elected and generally accepted pope as an invalid pope. The constant practice of the church, okay, we have to take it all with a grain of salt of what he says there, makes it evident that even in the case of an invalid election, this invalid election will be de facto healed through general acceptance of the newly elected by the overwhelming majority of the cardinals and bishops. So how can something, well, first of all, give me an example. Give me an example of an invalid papal election that magically became a valid papal election, a valid pope. I think there's one pope in history which was an anti-pope and magically became a real pope. I'm not certain about that. But where is the examples? Bishop Schneider, give me the example. Show me where invalid papal elections magically became valid papal elections. An invalid elected pope magically became a validly elected pope. And why is Bishop Schneider even bringing this topic up? It is we're not even talking about that in this case. We're talking about the fall of Francis from the pontificate because of manifest heresy, denial of the Catholic faith. So why is he bringing it up? Because I did several videos on the topic. For example, first and foremost, above all of this, there are, I think, 3 different ways in which Francis would not be Pope. Number one, that Pope Benedict XVI did not resign the papacy. He only resigned the active exercise of the papacy. He renounced the exercise of the ministry, but not the ministry. And this is, of course, I have several videos on the topic. You can just go watch them for more detail. Confirmation of this is basically his personal secretary, Archbishop Gonswine, who said it in 2016 in a conference and repeated it, printed in a book, published, I believe, in 2020. You can purchase it from Amazon.com. It wasn't just this, it includes that speech of his. In it, Archbishop Gonswine, the personal secretary of Benedict XVI, Joseph Ratzinger, who is the custodian of everything of B16, himself says that Benedict XVI did not abandon the office of Peter, which would have been for him unthinkable after his irrevocable acceptance of the office in 2005. So this is exactly what Gonswine says, and Canon law says the office is one. So if Benedict did not resign the office of Peter, which is required for resignation, is occupied. Therefore, no second person can occupy the office. Therefore, Francis Jorge has not been elected Vicar of Christ. Maybe an administrator of the Diocese of Rome, but certainly not the Vicar of Christ, because the Vicar of Christ did not abandon the office, to use the words of Gonswine. So this is number one. Number two, there is the possibility, let's assume, Benedict resigned validly, which I do not accept. Let's say it is true he resigned validly, but I'm too stupid to understand this. And indeed, there was a conclave to elect him. But there are difficulties with that situation too. Number one, I did a review on this book, which is, I don't have it on me at the moment. It's called the St. Gallen Mafia. And this was a group of cardinals who conspired, it's written by Julia Maloney, conspired to elect Francis as Pope. And of course, such conspiracies render the conclave or the election void, null and void. Before we get into it, again, for Benedict XVI, there was another book which I did a review on by Antonio Socci, The Secret of Benedict. The Italian title is actually Why He's Still Pope. I did a review on that book. You have a little video. Actually, I think it's divided in 2, as I recall, or is it 1? I don't remember now. Then there was another review of just a section of this book, The Keys of the Kingdom, in which it shows you, I think, Cardinal Cormac, Cardinal Murphy O'Connor, or somebody, one of the British cardinals, how he coordinated with the British government, and they actually went to the British embassies to coordinate, basically in cooperation with the St. Gallen Mafia, the other cardinals, in their conspiracy to elect Bergoglio, Francis, to the papacy, which would, of course, render the pontificate invalid. So first of all, there's the case of Benedict never resigned the papacy. I mean, he was called Pope Benedict until the day he died. He was buried as Pope. He was buried in the tomb of Pope John Paul II as Pope, as a pontiff of the Roman Church, not as the ex-bishop, So that's one possibility. Second possibility is there was this St. Gallen Mafia and the conspiracies with the British government and these cardinals conspiring to elect Francis, which would render his election null and void, invalid, because according to the constitution for the election of the Pope, issued by Pope John Paul II. So that wouldn't. And then a third possibility is, again, it's not. This is kind of the election of Pope Francis by one of his most worshippers of Pope Francis, Gerald O'Connell. So it is a purely positive one, but it is a historical one because it talks about the process of the election and the vote counting and so forth. And in it, again, it's a topic which I think Antonio Socci brings up either in this book or another book, where there was an extra vote or an extra ballot or an extra vote, a fifth one, but the law of the election required maximum of 4. But there was supposedly some problem, and they did an extra vote on top of what was allowed 4 per day. So they did 5, which again would render the election invalid because you did 5 instead of the 4 required by the Constitution. So again, so this is why there are the 3 possibilities. Number 1, Benedict never resigned, the papacy. Number 2, which I think is the most likely. Number 2 is the St. Gallen mafia conspiracy with the British government, blah, 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 which would render the election invalid. And number 3, the extra ballot or extra vote in the conclave. Watch my book review on this because I deal with it a bit more, which again would render the election invalid. So these are why I believe Bishop Schneider brings up the case of the election. We're done with the election story now. Now let's continue. Now he says, even in the case of a heretical pope, he will not lose his office automatically. Notice how he says it emphatically as if it's a doctrine of the faith, when in fact the exact opposite is the doctrine of the church. But we'll see that is the case coming up. But look how he says it. He will not lose his office automatically. Boom. As if we're supposed to, Bishop Schneider said it, so bow down and say amen. No, I don't care if Bishop Schneider said it, because he is wrong. And there is nobody within the church to declare him deposed because of heresy. Now, what is the word? Okay, this is actually a bit accurate in a sense, because he uses the word deposed. And what, of course, deposed means? Deposed means to be removed from office suddenly and forcefully, basically being forced to, like a military coup, or forced to removed from office. They remove somebody by law from his office. That's somebody to be deposed. Okay, so that is somebody being deposed. Yeah, well, nobody can depose the Pope for heresy, but there is another way. So anyways, of a Pope being removed. So he says, again, as I will repeat, he says that even in the case of a heretical Pope, he will not lose his office. Wrong. You will see 4 or 5 cardinals dispute him: Cardinal Mueller, Cardinal Brandmüller, Cardinal Burke, Cardinal Giralanda, which actually which Francis made cardinal. So 4 cardinals and canonists, 1 bishop, a bishop, and several canonists, all say, Schneider, you're wrong. Actually, no, a pope does lose. A pope and actually a bishop would lose the jurisdiction in his office in case of public manifest heresy. So yeah, you are wrong, Bishop Schneider, there. And there's nobody to declare him deposed because of heresy. We will see how the cardinals handled the situation in a bit. They do not depose the Pope, but I will let you know. I'll let you know from the Code of Canon Law of 1917, and actually even the Code of 1983, and the canons basically say the cardinal do not depose, but because nobody can nobody can judge the first see or the first seat, but they simply declare the fact that the seat is empty, because the Pope basically did a tacit resignation. He basically resigned. He himself deposed himself from the office. So the cardinal basically say, well, the office is empty, so basically somebody else can come and be elected to the papacy. So this is basically how you will see how this one works. Okay. So he says, oh, somebody to depose the Pope is kind of a heresy of conciliarism and Episcopalianism. So anyways, we're going to ignore all that because nobody's deposing anybody. Basically, the cardinals simply recognize the fact that the seat is empty because the fact is the Pope, through heresy, has deposed himself through tacit resignation. So nobody is deposing anything. So all his argumentation there is meaningless. So the theory of the automatic loss of the papacy due to heresy remains only an opinion. Well, it is the opinion. It is the theory. Actually, it is codified in both codes of canon law, the 1917 code and the 1983 code of canon law, that through heresy, a pope and a bishop, any office, any ecclesial office, any member of the clergy, anybody in office in the church, so basically any office, any ecclesial office, and of course that includes the office of Peter, anybody occupying it would lose that office, would fall from that office through heresy, through tacit resignation, basically automatically through tacit resignation. Both codes basically say that. So his so-called opinion is actually codified in both codes of canon law. It remains only an opinion. So he says, in the 1917 Code of Canon Law, which I do have here it is. That's the 1917 Code of Canon Law. Here it is. That's it. Big as compared to, of course, the small, the 1983 Code of Canon Law. But in any case, they both deal with the same subject. In the Code of Canon Law. So when the Code of Canon Law, Codex Juris Canonici, came into force, the magisterium of the church, so the teaching authority of the church, eliminated from the new legislation the remark in the Decretum Gratiani in the old Corpus Juris Canonici, so the old body of canon law. But does a future magisterium have the power to eliminate what was declared, which is basically a collection of ancient apostolic laws? I don't know. I don't know if a pope has the power to do so or not. But in any case, the wording was eliminated, but the consequence actually remained the same. So let's read what Bishop Schneider says. So it eliminated from the new legislation the remark of the Decretum Gratiani in the old Corpus Juris Canonici, which stated that the Pope who deviates from right doctrine, meaning falls into heresy, can be deposed. That is true. It did remove the word deposed, mainly because of the decrees of the First Vatican Council. But the same Code of Canon Law actually explicitly says, as we shall see, that a pope, actually any office, becomes vacant by the law itself, by the mere fact of heresy, of a bishop, of a priest, of a pope. It automatically happens. How does it happen? Not through deposing somebody, but through tacit resignation, with no declaration required. So the office becomes vacant with nobody deposing anybody. It just becomes vacant through the fact, through the ipso facto, ipso jure, by the law, by the fact of heresy, through the law, by the law itself. The office becomes vacant. So it eliminated, because of the First Vatican Council, that nobody can judge the First See, Okay, well, nobody's deposing the Pope. Then you have a council higher than the Pope, because the higher can no one in inferior can remove a superior. So the solution to this problem was St. Robert Bellarmine's um, amalgamation of all the ancient teaching of all the fathers, that somebody in heresy loses all jurisdiction because he becomes cut off from the church, and someone who is not in the church cannot be a ruler of the church. So that they did remove the word deposed, but they simply said that the loss of office is automatic by the fact of the heresy, with no um, actually, you know what? I'm going to read it for you, because instead of me just kind of saying it off the top of my head here. Canon 188 of the 1917 Code of Canon Law, which is the one there, the one right here, which I showed you, states any office becomes vacant upon the fact, without any declaration, by tacit resignation, recognized by the law itself. It doesn't need anybody to recognize it. If a cleric, that includes the Pope, the Bishop of Rome. Number 4, publicly, not secretly, publicly defects from the Catholic faith. So Bishop Schneider, nobody's deposing anything, but the office automatically becomes vacant, meaning the cleric who held the office falls automatically from the office upon the fact, without any declaration, by tacit resignation recognized by the law itself. Ipso facto, ipso iure, bam, boom, finished. Publicly defects from the Catholic faith. End of story. And for the 1983 Code of Canon Law, which is this straight from the Vatican website, which I have right here, a resignation. Oh, this is a different story. But anyways, actually it's mentioned, which comes to the idea of Benedict XVI's resignation, Canon 188, a resignation made out of grave fear, that is inflicted unjustly or out of malice, substantial error. Oh yeah, I'm going to expand the papal office into a collegial office, an active and a passive ministry. Okay, or simony is invalid by the law itself. So a resignation made out of these reasons is invalid by the law itself. Substantial error, simony, fear is invalid no matter what, even if it is manifested correctly. Canon 194 of the new code, 1983 Code of Canon Law. The following are removed from the office so they are removed from an ecclesiastical office. Let's see how it is translated in 194 here. 194. Let's have a look if it is the same type of translation. 190, 192, 193. Yeah, the following are removed from ecclesiastical office by virtue of the law itself. Whereas, here it says by virtue of the law itself. Again, this has also English translation, one of the original translations. So by virtue of the law itself, or here it just simply says by the law itself. So automatically by the law itself, no declaration required, nobody's deposing somebody. The following people are removed from ecclesiastical office. The Bishop of Rome, the office of Peter, is an ecclesiastical office. It's the highest ecclesiastical, meaning church, office. And the following are removed by the law itself. Nobody needs to be deposed there. Number 2, which is a person who has publicly defected from the Catholic faith or from communion of the church. So falling into heresy. And it adds the new Code of Canon Law, which we will get to what that means later. The removal mentioned above in number 2 and 3 can be enforced, and I think in this translation says insisted upon or enforced, only if it is established by the declaration of a competent authority. Again, to cut to the chase, later on you're going to see all the canonists basically say that, again, this falling from office, being removed or losing by the law itself, by the fact itself of through heresy. If somebody falls into heresy, they fall from the office they hold, the ecclesiastical church office they hold. And the office of Peter is the highest ecclesiastical office. And if a person publicly defects from the Catholic faith, he is removed from the ecclesiastical office by the law itself. Okay? Now, it adds a proviso for this one. It says, as I said, that this removal, and number 2, can be enforced only if it is established by the declaration of a competent authority. So again, all the canons will explicitly say that who is this competent authority. These would be the cardinals, the College of Cardinals, or at least the cardinals residing in Rome itself, even at least them. They are the competent authority to recognize that they are the Roman clergy, so they are the competent authority to recognize, oh yeah, that office is empty now. Why? Because that person actually, fell into heresy and thus fell from the office automatically. So the office already is empty. And their so-called declaration, it's not a deposing anything. It is, they are declaring it is a fact. This is what happened. That office is empty because this person defected. So it was empty as soon as they publicly defected from the faith. Not until the declaration. The declaration is there simply to say, okay, well, he defected, so now it's clear for everybody. Now it's time to put somebody else in that same office. That is all that means. So basically, it is automatic, it is immediate, and any authorities is simply recognizing the fact that the office is empty. They are not deposing anybody. So there is no conciliarism, there is no somebody judging the primal see. The church has no power over the Pope formally or juridically. Well, if the Pope, which means the holder of the office of Peter, already fell from the office by tacit resignation, recognized by the law itself and by the fact of his falling into heresy, he is no longer Pope. They are simply recognizing that the office is empty. So Bishop Schneider says, the sure Catholic tradition says that in the case of a heretical pope, the members of the church can avoid him and resist him and refuse to obey him. Yeah, that's all the other canons say. Well, yeah, that's what you do in any case. But that does not mean that, no, we have to think the pope is always valid by magic until he dies. No. The pope, so Bishop Schneider says, the Pope cannot commit heresy when he speaks ex cathedra. This is a dogma of faith. Again, we are meant to bow down and say amen to everything Bishop Schneider says, because he is one of the very few who actually stands up for orthodoxy, for the truth, and for the tradition of the church. But this statement is true in the sense of a validly elected Pope. This is true in the case of a pope who has not publicly, pertinaciously, notoriously, through acts or words, advocated for heretical beliefs. Because if a pope is a heretic, he is not Pope. He already has fallen. So if this fallen from office Pope makes an ex cathedra declaration, that ex cathedra declaration can be false. Actually, you'll see one of the Cardinal Giralanda, actually says so explicitly that a Pope, even a validly elected Pope, if he, an ex cathedra declaration, declares a heresy, he loses his office ipso facto, ipso jure. Immediately, he is no longer Pope. And actually, Cardinal Mueller, in one of my videos, if you just search Mueller or Bishop Cardinal Mueller, in one of his videos, or because of one of the articles or speeches he said a while back, maybe a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I don't recall now. In the talk of it, in his explanation, he says, if a pope were ever to declare something ex cathedra, which is false, like not part of the doctrine of the church, it can be false, or it is false, or it is heretical. But how is this possible if a pope is a valid pope? Of course, it is not possible. Only if a valid pope, then that's not possible. But if a pope has already fallen into heresy, then that is possible. So, anyways, actually, Cardinal Mueller himself, head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, actually said that in one of the statements or speeches he did. I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100% certain I covered it because it was part of a longer video. So you just search Cardinal Mueller and you'll find one of them. I didn't really waste hours trying to find it, but one of them, he actually says, even when he's Pope, if a Pope declares something false as ex cathedra truth, then it is false and he is not Pope. But he didn't say he's not Pope. He said it is false. You can't even accept him as an ex cathedra declaration. So, so he says, yeah, Bishop Schneider, Bishop says, yeah, Pope, if he's not declaring something ex cathedra, can do errors, ambiguities, even heresies. So in such cases, one should respectfully correct him, avoiding purely human anger and disrespectful language. Resist him as one would resist a bad father of a family. Okay, here we go again. Now, yes, a pope can do ambiguities like all the sede vacantes people who basically want to call every single Pope St. Pius the 12th a heretic and they try to quote writings of Cardinal Ratzinger from 1960 something that he's a heretic, therefore he can never be Pope, and all this garbage, really. They are, ambiguities or because not clear. But but for a pope to speak heretical things unknowingly, maybe if a slip of the tongue, and it's like, oh, sorry, I said that in an audience last week. Sorry, I was mistaken. I was a slip of the tongue. I was corrected. The truth is so and so. End of story. But with Francis, we actually have always doubling down on his teachings and doubling down of his ideas, not a regret or a correction. Never. Actually, there's a book here defending. I haven't gone through it, but basically, it's a collection defending the truth against present heresies. And actually, it is basically a collection of all the different admonitions, letters. Even there was I did a video on it, 4 videos. Some of them, the voice was not very clear. That's older ones, where a big group of priests, theologians, laymen accused the Pope officially, Pope Francis, officially of the delict of heresy. And they were asking the bishops and cardinals to basically recognize the fact and declare the see empty, basically. Anyways, it's included in this book as well. So instead of you searching the internet for all the different stuff, here's a compendium of that's, of course, many more things happened after that book, but this has plenty of stuff in it anyways. So you will see saying for a pope to speak heresy. I mean, he knows what he's saying. He's a professor. He was a professor at Catholic University. He knows the doctrine of the church. So for a pope to go against the very doctrine and practice of the church, he knows what he's doing, and that in itself would constitute visible manifest heresy. Anyways, so let's see what Bishop Schneider finally says. So yeah, you can resist him, blah, blah, blah. Resist him as one would resist a bad father of a family. Now here, yet the members of a family cannot declare their evil father deposed from the fatherhood. Actually, see here, Bishop Schneider embraces the error of Pope Benedict XVI. Pope Benedict XVI said virtually the same thing to Peter Sewald in one of the interviews, which I have a video on, and it says, Benedict, I think it says, Benedict XVI says, what's the title of the video? Off the top of my head, I'm not going to search for it now. But basically, Benedict XVI says, I am a father. When I became Pope, I became Pope. He believed the papacy is kind of like an eighth sacrament. Like you get an indelible mark of the papacy on you. So you are a Pope forever. You cannot not be Pope. This was the idea of Benedict. He said, look, I'm a Pope, but I'm giving my eldest child, I still remain the father. Which shows you that he never really resigned the papacy. I remain the father, but I'm letting my eldest son run the business, basically. But I am the father, but with no response. I gave away my administrative functions, but I remain the father. So basically, Benedict says, I remain the Pope, but I gave my administrative power to my son to administer the family business. So, but no, when a Pope falls through heresy, from office, he is not even a member of the church. He is not a father of anybody. Maybe a father of heretics, but he's not a father of Catholics. He is not the father of the Orthodox because he is a heretic. He is not Orthodox. He is not a member of the church. He has not been deposed, but he deposed himself. He tacitly resigned the office through his heresy. So he is not a father. He is not even a member of the family. He is not a member of the family of God, which is the church. So no. So Francis is, so basically this idea that, he's a bad father, you can't depose a father. So meaning like what? The Pope is like, when he becomes chosen as a Pope, he becomes like indelibly marked as Pope forever and ever. No, he's not. This is the Pope. Papacy is an office like any ecclesial office. And those who fall into heresy in that ecclesial office fall from the office through tacit resignation. So he says, since the case of a heretical Pope is humanly irresolvable, well, if enough cardinals have the guts to say, well, look what's going on here. Yeah, he fell. Okay, it could create 2 popes, 3 popes. Then it's a bit of maybe the solution is worse than the crime. We must implore the supernatural faith and divine intervention. Okay, I can understand that. But the idea of saying, yeah, we can't even say, first to lie and say that the automatic loss of papacy, according to heresy, is just a theory and it's not even possible and it's wrong, is actually a lie, Bishop Schneider. So this is basically what Bishop Schneider said. But again, I don't want you to take my word because I am nobody. I'm some guy reading articles on YouTube. But I'm going to let the experts deal with it. So as I said, it's going to be a long video. So now we're going to go through Cardinal Giralanda, Gianfranco, Cardinal Giralanda, S.J., Society of Jesus. So Cardinal Giralanda, patron of the Order of Malta, former rector of the Pontifical Gregorian University. So he received a doctorate in jurisprudence from the University of Rome, La Sapienza. He has a degree and doctorate in canon law. So he is far above Bishop Schneider in qualifications as regards to canon law from the University, from the same university. He taught canon law. He was in the Faculty of Theology and the Faculty of Canon Law at the Pontifical Gregorian University. He would be a full-time professor and dean. He is dean of the Faculty of Canon Law from 2004 to 2010, and rector of the University of the Gregorian University. He was part of the Pontifical Council for the Interpretation of Legislative Text, which is basically Cardinal Burke's place, in the basically canon law. He was a member of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, prelate and attorney at the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signatura, judge of the Court of Appeals. He specializes mainly in canon law. He has 110 articles, specializing specifically, books and articles, specializing mainly on canon law. He has been awarded honorary doctorate from the Faculty of Canon Law at the Pontifical University of Salamanca. And he was created a cardinal by Pope Francis and the consistory of 27 August 2022. And of course, as I showed in previous videos, every cardinal chosen by Pope Francis was always taken to Pope Benedict XVI for approval and blessing. So this is Cardinal Giralanda. So I'm going to show you an article which he published in 2013 after the renunciation, so-called renunciation of the active exercise of the ministry of Pope Benedict XVI. So this is, of course, was in Italian from Civiltà Cattolica, which is the magazine of the Jesuits. So this is the Google Translate there for you. But anyways, causes. So it explains the causes and this was in March 2nd, 2013. So how does the Roman See become vacant? There are four ways. Number one, death. Number two, certain perpetual insanity or total mental infirmity. That's number two. Number three, notorious apostasy, heresy, or schism. That's how it becomes vacant. It becomes vacant. And number four, renunciation. Now, in the first case, the apostolic see becomes vacant the moment of the death of the Roman Pontiff, of course. Clear. Number 2 and 3, which is basically the second and third from the moment. So basically either insanity or apostasy, heresy, and schism. How does it become vacant? So it allows for a replacement to happen. It comes from the moment of the declaration by the cardinals. So there's a declaration by the cardinals, but you will see in the same article that it is not the cardinals who are deposing the Pope. It is not the cardinals. They are simply recognizing the fact that the Pope fell from office. So, I encourage you to find it yourself and read it. I'm just going to try to, because otherwise it's going to be a 5-hour video, and I do not want to do that. So this close union, he explains the union of the Pope and the bishops and so forth. This close union involves not only the hierarchical communion of the bishops with the Roman Pontiff, but also the communion of the head with the body. The munus of the chief, the office of the chief, the function is exercised. So the munus is exercised. Remember, Benedict renounced the exercise of the munus, but he never resigned the munus. So just to keep that in mind, just as a little aside for you. The munus of the chief is exercised for the good of the whole church. How is it? To safeguard unity of ecclesial communion, the unity of ecclesial church communion. So how does the Pope represent the church and the bishops? He does so by precisely how? By guaranteeing his function of the Pope is to guarantee and protect the integrity of the faith that Christ has deposited to the church through the apostles. There is no faith, no new synodal way to find new understanding of the faith. No, it's the same integrity of the faith. And what's another function of the pontiff is to guarantee and protect the truth and sanctity of the sacraments instituted by Christ, of the fundamental structure of the church established by Christ. So you cannot change the structure of the church established by Christ to make it into a synodal church instead of being the way it is, a hierarchical church, of the fundamental duties and rights of the faithful, to guarantee the fundamental duties and rights of the faithful, and so forth. Then, if the pontiff, here we go, Bishop Schneider, if the Roman pontiff did not express what is already contained, meaning the deposit of faith in the church, he would no longer be in communion with the whole church. You will see Cardinal Brandmüller. Actually, maybe I should just do that first. I'm afraid to skip websites because sometimes these highlights disappear on me. So, Cardinal Brandmuller, we're going to see in 2 seconds. He himself says a heretic basically is no longer a member of the church because he excommunicates himself from the church. So he is no longer in communion. He is excommunicate. So if the Roman Pontiff did not express what is already contained in the church, he would no longer be in communion with the whole church because he's being excommunicated. And therefore with the other bishops, successor of the apostles. Now the criterion, again, you should read the whole thing, but I'm just trying to cut it down a bit. The criteria then is the protection of ecclesial communion itself. Where this no longer exists on the part of the Pope through not expressing what is already contained in the faith of the church, meaning heresy, he, the Pope, would no longer have any power ipso jure, by the law itself. So by the fact of him not expressing the faith of the church, he, by the law itself, would lose his primacy of office, basically his primal office. He loses the papacy. It is the case admitted in doctrine of the well-known apostasy, heresy, and schism in which the Roman Pontiff could fall, but as a private doctor. So we must say that he cannot make heretical statements wanting to commit. So we say that the Pope cannot make heretical statements wanting to commit his primatial authority, because the authority of the chair of Peter, because if he did so if a Pope did so to make heretical statements binding on the faithful, if he did so, he would lapse ipso jure, by the law itself, from his office. He would fall immediately from his office. I hope this is clear for Bishop Schneider there. However, in such cases, since the first see, that's how the apologists for papal, I guess, untouchability would say, the first see is not judged by anyone, Canon 1404. No one could depose the Roman Pontiff, but there would only be a declaration of the fact that he fell from his office. And this should, I guess not required, because actually Monsignor Nicola Bux, he was said if cardinals, at least even the clergy of Rome could do so. But it should be from the cardinals, at least those present in Rome. And he says, well, this is very unlikely to happen, because of but this is exactly what it says. If a pope basically falls into heresy, he would lose his office ipso by the law itself. And nobody's deposing him, but the cardinals simply make a declaration of the fact that he actually fell from office, and the office is vacant. So again, he talks about Canon 332, number 2, where the Supreme Pontiff can renounce his office, not the exercise of the office, but the actual office. And he actually repeats Canon 188, which I mentioned before, that for various reasons, fear, malice, error, simony, the resignation or renunciation is invalid by the law itself. So no declaration is required. But then he wonders as well in this article, it says, he wonders what kind of title Benedict XVI will retain. And he says, we think that he should be given the title of Bishop Emeritus of Rome, like any other diocesan bishop who leaves office. But of course, Benedict never left Rome, never left the Vatican, stayed dressed in white, remained to be called by his papal name of Benedict. He received the cardinals elected and gave them the papal blessing. And he was died as Pope Benedict and was buried in the papal cemetery. Apparently Benedict didn't really leave office. He left the exercise of the office to, like a father retiring, as he said to Peter Seawolf. But we see here Cardinal Giralanda, at that time Father Gianfranco Giralanda, says explicitly that a pope falls from office through heresy by the law itself. And all the cardinals are doing is simply, they're not deposing the pope, they are simply stating the fact that the see is empty. Period. All right. So now let's go to Cardinal Burke. That was published in 2016. Cardinal Burke. Again, canon law. He's the head of the canon, whatever legislative text, and the apostolic signatura, and canon law question. Ask Cardinal Burke. But Cardinal Giralanda said basically the same thing. Now let's see Cardinal Burke, a pope who professes formal heresy, would cease to be pope. That was published in 2016. Was it 2016? Let me just be sure. December 21st, 2016. So let's go to the key parts. So the question is, some people are saying that the Pope could separate himself from communion with the Church. As this Cardinal Giralanda just said, he would no longer be in communion with the Church. He excommunicate himself. Can the Pope legitimately be declared in schism or heresy? Cardinal Burke. If a Pope would formally profess heresy, he would cease by that act, by ipso facto, to be the Pope, meaning he falls from the office of Pope. It's automatic, contra Bishop Schneider. And so that could happen. That is again Cardinal Burke. Back to this question about the Pope committing heresy. What happens then if the Pope commits heresy and he is no longer Pope? So that's the question. What happens? A new conclave, who's in charge of the church, blah, blah, blah. Who is competent to declare him to be in heresy? Cardinal Burke. It would have to be members of the College of Cardinals. As Cardinal Giralanda said, it should be the College of Cardinals, or at least the cardinals present in Rome. Basically, and they're not deposing the Pope. They are simply stating the fact that the seat is empty, that he has deposed himself, that he is no longer Pope. So this is, Cardinal number 2. Cardinal, again, both canon law experts, unlike Bishop Schneider. The Pope who professes formal heresy would cease to be Pope by the mere fact, by the law itself, with no declaration. The declaration is simply to recognize the fact that the seat is empty. All right, now let's go to, I did a video actually, and I said, why are you censoring Cardinal Mueller? LifeSite News with they did an interview. Sorry, I forgot. John Weston, the head of LifeSite, did an interview with Cardinal Mueller, asked him about his stuff. And this article supposedly was giving us, here's the video so you can actually watch the video yourself. I did a review on of the video, and what they censored what Cardinal Mueller was said there. And this is just recent, actually, the July 13th, 2023. And this, so the supposed transcript in the article here is not really complete. They censored Cardinal Mueller, where Cardinal Mueller himself talks about, there are my great predecessor in the Holy Office, Robert Bellarmine, and Cajetan had, their ideas about the papacy. So Cardinal Mueller was himself hinting to John Henry Weston that he held the ideas, the opinions of Bellarmine and Cajetan about basically the loss of papal office, that the Pope can, through heresy, the Pope who loses his office. Bellarmine has it an immediate loss. Cajetan has, somebody has to declare him so, to be declared. So basically, but with Vatican I, Bellarmine's opinion stands. So basically, Mueller, not in the actual transcript, but in the actual interview, references Bellarmine and Cajetan about basically the vacancy of the papal office, the fall of the Pope through heresy. So that was Cardinal Mueller. And again, Cardinal Mueller in INFOVATICANA, a very recent interview about the church. In it, so this was published September 12th, 2023. Again, oh, come on, don't tell me it deleted. There are highlights have disappeared, certain highlights. Please don't do that to me. Oh man, there are certain highlights. They have, let me move my face there. Anyways, certain things have disappeared, certain things are still there. Okay, well, anyways, so he says the Pope sits on the chair of Peter. So this has been deleted. So in the upper room before the Passion, Jesus tells Peter, once you have converted, strengthen your brothers. That is, in the faith of Christ, Son of the living God. Only then is he the rock on which Christ built the church, and the gates of hell cannot overcome it. So he says, do you think that changes in matters of faith and doctrine can be approved as some groups and movements within the church intend? No person on earth can change, add, or take away from the word of God. So no person on earth. As successors of the apostles, the Pope and bishops must teach the people what the earthly and risen Christ, the only teacher, has ordered them to do. So no person on earth can teach error, teach their own idea or take away from the word of God. So that includes the Pope. So it's not like, he's listening to the Spirit and listen to the synodal process and the voice of the Spirit through the people of God, and we're going to declare a new doctrine. No. So Cardinal Mueller continues, the infallibility of the magisterium extends to the preservation and faithful interpretation of the mystery of faith entrusted once for all to the church, depositum fidei, or sound doctrine, the teaching of the apostles, as Cardinal Giralanda stated previously, which I shared with you. The Pope and the bishops do not receive a new revelation, as he quotes Vatican II. And actually, Vatican I itself, it says the Holy Spirit is not given to Peter so he can invent new revelations. No, but to preserve the revelation already existing. So what happens if, for example, the Synod Assembly approves the blessing of homosexual couples and the changes sexual morality, the elimination of obligation to priestly celibacy, allowing for a female diaconate. What would you accept it? Anyways, I'm not going to read the whole article. I'm just quoting what is necessary. Blessing the immoral behavior of people of the same or opposite sex is a direct contradiction to the word of God, to the word and will of God, a gravely sinful blasphemy. Only such demands with a majority vote would be obsolete a priori. So even if a majority of bishops and laity participating at the synodal prayer conference or whatever, they choose sins which are contrary to the faith, they are obsolete. They are null and void. Nor could they be implemented. So even their recommendations, oh, we want female diaconate as clergy, we want blessing of sin, all that cannot be implemented in canon law by the entire college of bishops with the Pope or by the Pope alone, because they contradict the revelation and clear confession of the Church. Let me close this, move myself back up there. All right. The formal authority of the Pope cannot be separated from the substantive connection with sacred scripture, apostolic tradition, and the dogmatic decision of the magisterium that preceded him. So basically the teaching of the Church over 2,000 years. Otherwise, he says, basically, it's like what Luther said, the Pope is a walking God, he can make up his own religion. Yeah. In such an extreme situation, which basically hopefully God save us. So if a Pope or a bishop attempt to do which is contrary to the faith, every ecclesiastical official, that includes the supreme ecclesiastical official, which would be the official in the seat of Peter, would have lost his authority. Would have lost his authority. And where does the authority comes from? It comes from the office. The office gives him the authority. So meaning he would have lost his authority because he has lost his office. And no Catholic. So basically in that situation, immediately, basically every ecclesiastical official would have lost his authority. And no Catholic is anymore obliged to religiously obey a heretical or schismatic bishop, and includes the Pope, who is the Bishop of Rome. So nobody's obliged to obey or listen to a heretical bishop because, again, they are no longer in communion with the Church and they have defected from the faith. So it is an automatic thing. So if that ever happens, every ecclesiastical would lose it. No declaration is required. It happens immediately. This is Cardinal Gerhard Mueller, again from the congregation, formerly from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, of course, removed by Francis because he is, Cardinal Mueller is Catholic and Francis obviously not. Now, Cardinal Brandmüller, one of the dubia cardinals, as they say. Cardinal Brandmuller, those who call for women priests are heretics and excommunicated. Yeah, and actually, even that goes for female deacons when they mean deacons as a female equivalent to the male deacon, which mean part of the clergy. That would make them heretics because no such thing existed. Because in the Council of Nicaea in 325, it explicitly declares that those so-called deaconesses are not part of the clergy. They were never, no hands were ever laid on them, meaning they were never ordained. They are not part of the clergy. That they are in all respects to be considered part of the laity. That's the Council of Nicaea in 325, talking about deaconesses, which shows you whenever the ancient talks about deaconesses, they certainly do not mean female deacons, part of the clergy. So they would be heretics, whoever tries to impose that. However, Cardinal Brandmüller said the idea of a female ordination had been definitely ruled out by St. John Paul II, and therefore anyone who insists on promoting the idea or any other heretical idea has left the foundation of the Catholic faith and fulfills the elements of heresy, which has the elements of heresy have its consequence, the exclusion from the church. Excommunication, exclusion from the church, no longer in communion with the church, as Cardinal Giralanda had been saying about a heretical pope. He would no longer be in communion with the church. He's been excommunicated. He excommunicates himself and falls from the papacy. The cardinal added that the church is not a human institution, but lives according to the forms, structures, and laws given to her by her divine founder. And no man has the power, no man, which includes the Pope, has the power to change. Also, no Pope and no council. And that's basically exactly what Cardinal Giralanda was saying about the functions of the papacy is to preserve the faith, preserve the form and structure of the church, exactly repeated by Cardinal Brandmuller. That includes the Pope and the council. So for a Pope or a council to even attempt to do that, they would be heretics, be excommunicate, and of course no longer have power to rule in the Church of God. So I can end it here with, actually no, there's Cardinal Monsignor Nicola Bux, and I have here, you know what, we'll start with the canons. Yeah, okay, well, we'll do Edward Peters, Ed Peters, who is actually the translator. He's a very well-known, famous canonist. He is the translator of this one, Edward Peters, curator. English translation with exhaustive scholarly. So he's a well-known canonist. He's a translator of the 1917 Code of Canon Law. So he has an article. Again, I think this is from 2016, December 16th, 2016. So it says, no one, so it's a canonical primer on popes and heresy. So what are the teachings of the church? First, heresy is and only is. So basically, I mean, I'm just suggesting that you read the full article. So it's called a canonical primer on popes and heresy. So read the full article. Otherwise, it's going to take me too long. First, heresy is and only is the obstinate denial or obstinate doubt after deception of baptism of some truth that must be believed by divine and Catholic faith. So even doubt. And what is the truth? Well, what has been taught for 2,000 years in the catechisms and the creeds and the councils. Second, we can dismiss as impossible, indeed as unthinkable, thanks to the protection of the Holy Spirit, any scenario where a pope commits the church to a heresy. See Ott, Ludwig Ott, Fundamentals of Catholic Doctrine, or Catholic Answers, Papal Infallibility. So yeah, this is of course assuming we have a validly elected pope. This is of course assuming the pope did not fall into heresy prior to attempting to commit the church to heresy, because if he fell into heresy, then he is no longer pope. The seat is empty. So anyways, okay, setting aside a few who relying on half-baked notions, like popes are not bound by canon law. Actually, I was on Twitter, and I was quoting basically the Code of Canon Law in response to Bishop Athansius Schneider, the Code of Canon, Code of 1917 and Code of 1983. And this person replying to me said, the Pope is above the law. The Pope is above canon law. The Pope is not bound by canon law. So according to Ed Peters here, these are half-baked notions, like popes are not bound by canon law. So again, he points others, of course, trying to say, well, we can't judge the Pope, we can't go with, because again, talks about Canon 1404. in the new Code of Canon Law, which states that the first see is judged by no one, and conclude that only remedies, as Bishop Schneider says, only remedies in the face of a genuinely heretical popes are prayer and fasting. We can't do nothing, sorry. So we can't do nothing. But these are, of course, as we've seen, false. So now he quotes ancient authorities of authorities, like the highest authorities in canon law. Wrenn writes in 2000, Canon 1404 is not a statement of personal impeccability, meaning the Pope is sinless, or inerrancy of the Holy Father. He's not a walking God, as so many actually heretics treat the Pope. Those who rejected John Paul II and rejected Benedict XVI, and they would dispute everything they would say, suddenly they want total obedience and servitude to every word coming from Francis. Suddenly they are papal loyalist worshippers, actually. Should indeed the Pope, now this still quoting Wrenn, W-R-E-N-N, he says, should indeed the Pope fall into heresy, it is understood that he would lose his office. This was written in 2001. To fall from Peter's faith is to fall from his chair. To fall from Peter's faith is to fall from his chair. While I suggest that Wern's warning be read again, lest its startling impact be overlooked by the calm manner in which he expressed it, turning to the crucial question as to who would determine whether a given pope has fallen into heresy. Wrenn notes that it is not settled by Canon 1404, nor, I would add, as it is settled by any other canon in the code. But again, one might turn to canonical tradition for insight. Again, I'm going to skip some. The incomparable Franz Wernz, whose summary of the various canonical schools of thought about the possibility of papal fall from office due to heresy is instructive. What does he say? So he quotes him, emphasis and citation omitted. So he says, through heresy, notoriously and openly expressed, the Roman Pontiff, should he fall into such, is by that very fact automatic, Bishop Schneider, and before any declaratory sentence of the Church deprived of his power of jurisdiction. This is basically, again, Cardinal Mueller saying any ecclesiastic which says that, he has no power. Don't obey him. You don't have to obey him because he has lost his power. What Cardinal Mueller just said. He loses his power of jurisdiction. So again, I'm going to repeat this. Through heresy, notoriously and openly expressed, the Roman Pontiff, should he fall into such, is by that very fact and before any declaratory sentence of the Church deprived of his power of jurisdiction. So, again, I'm skipping some. So he talks about the 5 different views of how that happens. He dismisses a bunch of it. The 4th view is with Suarez and Cajetan, which actually Cardinal Mueller mentions Cajetan and Bellarmine. And Bellarmine, he calls him my great predecessor and doctor of the Church, head of the Holy Office, head of orthodoxy for the Church, Bellarmine. So, and a saint. So Cajetan and Suarez basically say, that a pope, even if they say basically a pope can be deposed for heresy, but they have to be deposed by a sentence, like as a declaratory sentence of a crime. But Bellarmine says this cannot be defended but because then you're putting inferiors to judge the superior. There is the fifth view of Bellarmine, which was expressed, and it is basically the one encoded in the 1917 Code of Canon Law and the 1983 Code of Canon Law, which basically say, both of them, that the Pope or anyone in ecclesiastical office falls from that office through heresy, schism, or apostasy, ipso facto, ipso iure, immediately, with no declaration required, through tacit resignation. Any further declaratory sentence is basically recognizing the fact that they have lost their jurisdiction and the office is empty, period. So even Code of Canon Law actually adheres to, now it's part of the doctrine of the church. And Bellarmine basically is repeating the teaching of all the ancient fathers, which say, not a member of the church through heresy, you cannot be ruler of the church. Okay, so finally, there is the fifth view of Bellarmine, which was expressed at the outset in the assertion above, and which is rightly defended by Tanner and others as being more approved and more common. For he who is no longer a member of the body of the church, that is, of the church as a visible body, he excommunicates himself through heresy, cannot be the head of the universal church. But a pope who falls into public heresy, we're not talking about secret thoughts here, would by that fact cease to be a member of the church. So a pope who falls into public heresy, by that very fact stops being a member of the church. Because he loses communion, breaks communion, no longer in communion of the church, as Ghirlanda says. He becomes excommunicated, as Brandmuller says. Therefore, he would also upon that fact cease to be head of the church. Because if you're not a member of the church, you cannot be head of the church. So a publicly heretical pope, who by the mandate of Christ and of the apostles should be avoided because of the danger to the church, must be deprived of his power, as nearly everyone admits. So he has to be deprived of his power. But he cannot be deprived of his power by a merely declaratory sentence. So basically, as I said, he says the declaratory center is not basically based upon judging. So this is in summary. It needs to be said clearly, a publicly heretical Roman Pontiff loses his power upon the very fact. He loses upon the very fact, as Cardinal Brandmüller, Cardinal Mueller, Cardinal Giralanda, Cardinal Burke have stated. Meanwhile, a declaratory criminal sentence, although it is merely declaratory, should not be disregarded, for it brings about, makes it again in the new Code of Canon Law, talks it being enforced or insisted upon. Not that a pope is judged to be a heretic, but rather that he is shown to have been found heretical. That is, a general council declares the fact of the crime. So they're not actually judging the pope, by which a pope has separated himself from the church and has lost his rank. And this great canon authority, Edward Peter, says, I know of no author coming after Wernz who disputes this analysis. May I say again, heretical popes are about as rare can be, yet still be. In some, and while additional important points could be offered on this matter in the view of modern canonists from Wernz to Wrenn, however remote is the possibility of a pope actually falling into heresy, and however difficult might be to determine whether a pope has so fallen, such a catastrophe, Deus vetet, would result in the loss of papal office. Period, exclamation point. So this is what the canonists have said. So So the declaratory sentence talked about in the new Code of Canon Law is simply basically recognizing the fact that yes, the seat is empty because the Pope fell into heresy. So we're not deposing the Pope. We're just simply stating the fact that it's empty. Now, we're almost done because I'm actually tired of talking. Cardinal Nicola Bux, no, not Cardinal, actually, Nicola Bux, Monsignor Nicola Bux. Where is it? Where's the highlight? Did it disappear on me again? Switch it again to English because this is the Italian. Okay, move my face around again. Translate it, disappear. See, that's why it's kind of annoying, these things. Anyways, I'll just show the... So, Nicola Bux. Well, actually, I know exactly where this section is. I don't even need to look at this section. It is here, down here. Assignments. So I can close that section here. Move my face back where it belongs. So here it is, 1988. All right, let's just make it nice and big so everybody can see it. Magnify. Boom. So, who is Nicola Bux? So, Pope John Paul II appointed him consultant to the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, and in 2002 to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. He has been confirmed in the roles until 2019. So, he's been in the Congregation for the Causes of Saints and the Doctrine of the Faith up to 2019. In the Congregation for Saints in 2013, and the Doctrine of the Faith, of course, 2013, what happened? We had the great Francis come. So he's a personal friend and collaborator with Joseph Ratzinger, who basically became Cardinal Pope Francis. Monsignor Bux was appointed by Cardinal Ratzinger as expert in the preparatory work of the World Synod of Bishops and in drafting this document on the Eucharist, a source and summit of life in the mission of the Church, and of the Instrumentum Laboris of 2003-2005. Anyways, and after Pope Benedict's election, Bux was appointed Secretary, Special Synod of Bishops, blah, blah, blah. So basically, this is Nicola Bux. His orthodoxy is known. So he did an interview with Aldo Maria Valli in 2018. And I have a video on this, definitely, on the full interview about schism and heresy and blah, 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 a whole bunch of stuff. Oh, come on, don't tell me again it disappeared, all my highlights. A lot of highlights disappeared again. This is quite annoying, I have to say. So a lot of that stuff has been disappeared. I'm not going to search for it again, but I'm going to, until, what is here, in the decree of Gratian, let's see, is it still there? Oh, yeah, it's here. So what's the problem? Well, I'm just going to go through it. If I don't find it, I'm going to bring this thing up again. All right, so let's go through it. So again, this is in the decree of Gratian, which Bishop Schneider talks about removing the deposing of a pope. It says in this canon, which he cites, no mortal will have the presumption to speak of the guilt of the pope, since charged with judging everyone, the pope. He must not be judged by anyone unless he deviates from the faith. This is an instant translation error. So distancing and deviation from the faith is called heresy. Obviously, the deviation must be manifest in public. So again, this is clear. It's not a secret heresy, secret sin. In the case of manifest heresy, according to St. Robert Bellarmine, the Pope is to be judged. Robert Bellarmine says basically he falls under the papacy immediately, as we have seen before. Again, remember that Bellarmine was the prefect of the Holy Office, whose job was to keep the orthodoxy of the faith of everyone, including that of the Pope. Consequently, anyone who does not defend the true faith loses all ecclesiastical. So basically, people who fall into heresy, anyone who does not defend the true faith, meaning falls into heresy, loses all ecclesiastical, patriarchal, and actually the lost in translation here, eparchal office, etc. So basically he loses the office. Papal office, patriarchal office, eparchal office, bishop, so he loses the office. So he says, Aldo Maria Valli asks, excuse me, Miss Don Nicola, are you saying that in the case of heresy, just as the heretical Christian ceases to be a member of the church, the Pope also ceases to be the Pope and head of the ecclesial body and loses all jurisdiction? Yes. This is the emphatic answer. Yes. As Brandmüller, Burke, Müller, Ghirlanda have said, heresy affects faith and membership in the church, which are the root and foundation of jurisdiction. Every believer, including the Pope, separates himself from the unity of the church with heresy. So, faced with the eventuality so serious to some cardinals, again, or even the Roman clergy or the Roman Synod, could admonish the Pope for fraternal correction, to resist him to his face, as Paul says. In case, so as Giralanda again said, it was the cardinals in Rome. In case the Pope's pertinacity in error, we must distance ourselves from him, as Schneider and others have said, in accordance with what the Apostle says to Titus 3:10-11. The moment the heresy was known and made public, the Pope would lose ipso facto, by that fact, the Pontificate. This is Nicola Bux, echoing Cardinals Giralanda, Burke, Mueller, Brandmüller. And of course, Ed Peters and Wernz and the other canonical authorities he quoted. For the theology of canon law, pertinacious heretic is the one who doubts truth of faith consciously and voluntarily, that is, with the full awareness of this truth is a dogma or a doctrine, solid doctrine, and with full adhesion of the will. Another way of a pope getting excommunicated is to subvert the liturgical rites based on apostolic tradition. He could become a schismatic. That's the case in case of Paul VI. And of course, definitely in Francis, who wants to abolish the ancient liturgies. And this is actually not off the top of his head. I've had other videos basically upon the Creed of the Council of Trent, the Doctrine of the Council of Trent. The book written by Klaus Gamber with the foreword of Cardinal Ratzinger, in which he quotes actually Suarez and other heavyweight doctors of the church, saying that a pope would fall into schism, become a schismatic if he attempts to abolish or replace the ancient rites of the church with new ones. If the pope does not behave as pope and head of the church, neither is the church in him nor is he in the church. So that what happens in this case, the pope separates himself from Christ, who is the principal unity of the church. And he quotes Pope Innocent III, who says that one must obey the pope in everything until he turns against the universal order of the church. So, and if he does so by behaving in this way, the pope is no longer subject to Christ and therefore separates from the body of the church. So he's no longer in communion, using the words of Cardinal Giralanda. He excommunicates himself, using the words of Cardinal Mueller. Whoever wants to be a pope cannot deny Catholic truth. Indeed, he must adhere to it in its entirety if he wants to claim magisterial authority, teaching authority. And as Cardinal Mueller says, if they start teaching heresies, they lose that teaching authority and jurisdiction. We don't have to obey them or listen to them. And actually, he quotes Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI. He says, in the case of opposition of the text of a pontifical document and other testimonies of tradition, so if there is an opposition between a pontifical document and other texts of tradition, it is permissible for an educated believer who has carefully studied the question to suspend or deny his assent to the document itself. again called Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, in his book, Faith, Reason, Truth and Love, from 2009, he says, on the contrary, a criticism of papal pronouncements will be possible and necessary to the extent that they lack coverage in Scripture, in the Creed, and the faith of the Universal Church. So in these cases, yeah, criticism of papal pronouncements will be possible and necessary. So Monsignor Nicola Bux says, in short, if the Pope does not guard the doctrine, he cannot demand discipline. If he then lost the Catholic faith, he would forfeit the apostolic see automatically, Bishop Schneider. He just says basically the power of the keys of Peter does not extend to the point that the Supreme Pontiff can declare not sin that which is sin or sin that which is not sin. That would in fact be calling good evil and evil good. Something is always and has been and will be very distant from him who is the head of the church, pillar and foundation of the truth. And that's actually quoting Robert Bellarmine in his De Romano Pontifice. Consequently, the Pope, who as a private person identifies himself with heresy, would no longer be the Supreme Pontiff or Vicar of Christ on earth. By the mere fact, ipso facto. Then Aldo Maria Valli says, but Nicola Bux, you yourself said it would be kind of difficult. There's a lot of practical reasons. There's kind of difficulty. Anyways, he says, Nicola Bux says, in theory, the Cardinals can ascertain this heresy. But again, about the primacy of the See of 1404, but we have the Canonists before dealt with this subject again. Because they're not deposing the Pope, they're simply stating the fact that the Pope has fallen. Now here, for those who make fun of those, here's a statement from Nicola Bux, who basically gives voice to those who've been maligned by other so-called traditional Catholics for simply stating Benedict did not resign the office, simply its exercise. And as attested by Benedict himself in his last audience, as attested by Gonswine in 2016, as attested by Canonists in 2013 or 2014. I put him in my other videos, which he actually goes through the case of papal resignations, and Canon law and actually concludes the same thing, that Benedict simply resigned the exercise of the office, but not the office. So anyways, so here's what Nicola Bux says to conclude with his interview. It would be easier to examine and study more carefully the question relating to the validity of Pope Benedict XVI's resignation. That is, whether it was full or partial, halfway as some have said, or dubious, since the idea of a sort of collegial papacy seems decidedly against the evangelical dictate. So, in conclusion, you can say that heresy does not only... so the question is, in conclusion, can we say that heresy does not only consist in spreading false doctrines, but also in silencing the truth about doctrine and morality? Yes, of course, Nicola Bux says. And that is what Nicola Bux, a definitely orthodox and knowledgeable and qualified man, has said. So, and we've went through the Code of Canon Law of 1917. We've seen that as well, that it becomes vacant by the mere fact, without any declaration, through tacit resignation. And that was the new code. Again, it happens, is removed by the law itself immediately. And the only requirement is that it be enforced is by simply the cardinal recognizing the fact that the office is already empty. Not that they're removing anybody. So now this is actually the final section. I found this article actually in Tradition, Family, and Property. So it is a 3-part article. We're not going to deal with the first part of the trilogy. It again about the papal fall of from papal office, which is basically echoes all the canonists have mentioned, all the cardinals have mentioned. But it starts with what is heresy and why is it dangerous and so forth. That's part one. I don't think I highlighted anything there. So this is part one of the trilogy. The second part actually deals specifically with our topic here in response to Bishop Schneider. So the heretic excludes himself. This was published in 2019. From the church being condemned by his own judgment. So it talks about the previous article about what heresy is, blah, blah, blah. So we're not going to do that. What is heresy? Again, it talks about what the Code of Canon Law describes as heresy. Somebody's baptized, denies a Catholic doctrine of the faith, obstinate denial. We went through all of that, so I'm not going to repeat it. The delict of heresy, canonical delict of heresy. So these are, as I mentioned previously, that was in this book. It's included, but you can find it online. Go search for Pope Francis accused of heresy. Scholars accuse Pope Francis of heresy or something like that. You'll find the letter to the bishops and so forth. And the specification of the heresy, and was dealing mainly with Amoris Laetitia, but with other things as well. And they call it the delict of heresy. Although it is a grave sin against faith, internal, hidden heresy does not produce canonical effects. So if somebody is, if a pope or a bishop is a heretic internally, he doesn't believe in the transubstantiation, in the change of the bread and wine into the very body and blood of Christ. He does not believe that the Mass is a sacrifice. He does not believe that the Virgin Mary was ever virgin. He does not believe that Christ was God incarnate. He does not believe, in the Trinity, but simply in the Godhead of the Father. All these, if they're all hidden, you don't know them. They do not incur canonical effect. Like you can't say, well, he declared heresy, therefore he's no longer pope. He fell from the papacy, or he lost his jurisdiction as bishop because he declared heresy. So these are hidden. So we're not dealing with that. For espousing heresy, we have to have legal effect. It must be expressed externally, notorious, visible, public, through words, orally or in writing, or by acts, gestures, attitudes, ambiguities, or omissions. So this is actually mentioned quite a bit in the letter of accusations previously. In this case, the heresy will be a canonical delict. So the canonical delict is notorious, visible in two ways. There is a notoriety of law. So basically, after a trial, a decision is a competent judge. But that's not the case in this case because nobody can judge the Pope. Or through notoriety of, in fact, that is publicly known and is committed under such circumstances that no clever evasion is possible and no legal opinion could excuse the act. Number 3, heresy and loss of ecclesiastical office. It sounds like I'm repeating myself. It is kind of repeating myself, but I'm showing you from various sources, various authorities, various websites, that this is the teaching of the church. This is the teaching of the faith. This is the ancient practice of the church. Even though for a heretic pope to be that's so rare, it is almost unthinkable. But unfortunately, we are living in strange times. The punishment for the delict of heresy is automatic excommunication, according to Canon 1364. So I'm not gonna actually. This is in the new Code of Canon Law, Canon 1364, and it does say that because I did check it, and it is not just for heresy; it is for heresy, schism, and apostasy. So these all have automatic excommunication. For churchmen, so on top of this would go for everybody. laymen or ecclesiastics. So for churchmen, in addition to excommunication, espousing heresy entails the loss of ecclesiastical office by law. So Canon 194 in the new Code of Canon Law and Canon 188 in the old Code of Canon Law. Professor Juan Ignacio Arrieta, and he was secretary of the Pontifical Council for Legislative Texts since February 15th, 2007. I think I have a, yeah. So again, this is him, Juan Ignacio Arrieta, Ocho de Cincetru. So anyway, so he's prelate of the Catholic Church. So he was appointed in February 2007, appointed secretary of the Pontifical Council for Legislative Texts, again, canon law. So again, somebody expert in this field, unlike Bishop Schneider. So, Professor of the University of Navarra comments that the action by the competent authority referred to in the second paragraph of this canon, remember the canon says, well, for this, by heresy, there is a loss of office, Canon 194, by the law itself. The person falls from office, office is lost. But, which here it is, the following are removed from Ignacio by the law itself. That's the new Code of Canon Law. But then it's, who are these persons who are removed from office by the law itself? Number two is a person who has publicly defected from the Catholic faith or from communion of the Church. So this is what we're talking about here. Okay, so but then the code says, number two, the removal mentioned in numbers 2 and 3 can be enforced only if it is established by declaration of a competent authority, which we discussed previously, which would be preferably the College of Cardinals, or at least some cardinals in Rome, or worst case scenario by the Roman clergy themselves, declaring the fact of the office is empty, not judging anybody. So Professor Juan Ignacio Arrieta says that the action by competent authority referred to in the second paragraph of this canon is declarative and becomes necessary not to cause a vacancy of the right to the office, but so it doesn't cause the vacancy, because the vacancy is already empty, it's already there, but to juridically enable a person's removal to be requested, and consequently the installment of a new office holder. So the only point of this technicality, basically, is not to cause the vacancy, because the vacancy happened through the law itself, as the law itself says. It is simply to basically force the fact and get that guy out of there and have somebody else installed in that position. In other words, the loss of ecclesiastical office is automatic. The declaration by competent authority is necessary simply to confirm that the office is vacant and may be filled by someone else. Simple. Tacit resignation as the incompatibility between heresy and ecclesiastical jurisdiction. Canon 188 of the 1917 Code of Canon Law affirms that espousing heresy constitutes tacit resignation. Any office becomes vacant upon the fact and without any declaration by tacit resignation, recognized by the law itself, if a cleric, number 4, publicly defects from the Catholic faith. So according to Robert Bellarmine, all the ancient fathers teach that manifest heretics lose immediately all jurisdiction, as was echoed again by Cardinal Mueller in his interview with INFOVATICANA. So a pertinacious heretic, by which is meant one who adheres to an error contrary to the faith, or persistently doubts the truth of the faith with full knowledge and lucidity. And of course, for somebody who's been a professor at Catholic colleges like Francis, you'd expect that, of course, that he knows what the teaching of the church is, but the defendant's qualities, obvious doctrinal knowledge, and other circumstances that he could not be unaware of this doctrine was opposed to the churches. By this very fact, he will be considered a heretic. The heretic excludes himself from the church. Again, we talked about that previously. He even talks about, he calls up Jerome, Augustine, St. Paul. And he says, Titus 3:10 says that the heretic is condemned by his own judgment. And then finally, Pius XII affirms that no sin of its own nature severs a man from the body of the church, as does schism or heresy or apostasy. So this is in Corporis Christi of June 29, 1943 of Pius XII. So again, the sin by itself actually severs a man from the body of the church. Heresy, schism, and apostasy, according to Pius XII. Conclusion: the heretic excludes himself from the church, and no intervention is necessary on the part of the authority. The heretic dictates his own condemnatory sentence. The abandonment of the Catholic faith entails a tacit resignation of any ecclesiastical office, since those who are no longer part of the church cannot enjoy jurisdiction in it. That's why, again, Cardinal Mueller said they lose jurisdiction. You don't have to obey them, heretical bishops or popes. The importance of this theological canonical doctrine is not strictly academic. Okay, so anyways, and the final part of the article, which again I'm not going through, is just so kind of a conclusion of the trilogy, the Theological Heretical Pope. The Pope, manifestly a heretic, ceases by himself to be Pope. So, of course, it says we have to maintain love for the papacy because this is the foundation of our church, and the Pope's supreme power. But again, what does that exactly mean? So these are important. So one does not abandon the one and only true church, which is the Catholic Church, founded upon Peter the Rock, the center of unity. So this is very important. So we don't say, oh, I'm going to go be Orthodox now. Oh, I'm going to go be whatever. No. We're still Catholic. So sooner or later, Francis is going to die. And hopefully he is replaced by a true Pope. Again, he quotes Wernz-Vidal, makes it clear that a council cannot make a declaratory sentence that deprives the Pope of his power, for this would be an inferior passing sentence on his superior. A sentence can be admitted, however, if it is merely a mere finding of the crime committed, and not a legally binding declaratory sentence. In this case, the sentence would not be judging a legitimate pope, but only declaring that he is already judged by his act of adhering to heresy, and that by that act he has deprived himself of his dignity and office. So it is not to depose, it is not a deposition, but a tacit resignation. So again, summarizing the thought of St. Robert Bellarmine, Xavier de Silva says, for the Jesuit saint, one deposes the Pope, but no one deposes the Pope, but he himself leaves the visible church upon manifesting his heresy. Hence, he loses the pontificate, even if he remains in the apostolic palaces and tries to keep both his post and church governance. This is an abdication, a tacit resignation. For to renege the faith is an act incompatible with the papacy. So to apply his doctrine correctly, the manifest heresy of a heretic pope must be widely known among the faithful. When therefore a heretic pope's manifest heresy has attained this widespread knowledge, and it is clear that he is no longer pope, then conditions are set for further action by the hierarchy. So again, it's basically kind of talking about, not theoretically, yeah, he is obviously a heretic, but like 1,000 people only admit it because they are following and hearing and listening and studying, but like 99.7% of the Catholic population has no idea. It's kind of hard to say that, say, oh, these are a bunch of kooks, they don't know what they're talking about. So that's kind of, I think this is kind of a by this author trying to find a way of doing it in a certain safe way. So not everybody's saying this, you're a heretic, you're no longer pope, you're a heretic, you're no longer bishop, you're a heretic, you're otherwise going to be, But I mean, we're reaching a stage now when every day we have daily deluge of false doctrines being pushed upon us. The great saint did not do this because he could not. The great saint did not do this because he could not. Had he done so, he would have fallen into conciliarism, like others who posit the thesis of so he talks about Bellarmine having great doctrinal authority, blah, blah, blah. So basically, this is the end of the story. Basically, yeah, the Pope deposes himself. It is by law itself. Nobody's deposing him. He actually loses the papacy through heresy. And what the cardinals do, according to the new Code of Canon Law, they are simply declaring the fact that the seat is empty. So now we can enforce the fact of the heresy. We can insist upon it, and thus have somebody else installed or as pope or chosen as pope. And notorious heresy means notorious, something's well known for some bad or unfavorable quality. So it is clear and known. It's not some hidden thing. All right, so this is basically a clear and I would say devastating response of Bishop Schneider's idea that the Pope does not lose his office automatically through heresy. This has, of course, been thoroughly and completely demolished by Cardinal Giralanda, by Cardinal Burke, by Cardinal Mueller, by Cardinal Brandmüller, by Monsignor Nicola Bux, by Edward Peters, and the great Canonists he quotes. So that's it. That's all. Hope you found this video informative, clear. And what do we do? You know what I do? I know what I know, and I'll just still go to the ancient liturgy. I go to Mass, receive the sacraments, keep the faith as much as I can, and do what needs to be done, basically speak the truth. But I don't go nuts and insane because what am I going to do about it? I can't do much. And anyways, how old is Jorge now? Quite old. So he could, Jesus Christ might call him for his judgment any moment. And don't know the hour or the time or the minute or the second. The hour of judgment, the hour of death, the hour of scrutiny comes of how did you rule my church? Did you feed my lamb? Did you feed my sheep? Did you feed them with bread or with stones? That's it. That's all. See you next time.